We are Flying Walrus Studios. We are 6 university students with a passion for gaming and a dream of becoming part of the game development industry. Our goal was to create a brand that is directly connected with the games we make. Our expansive universe offers a fun and unique gaming experience that appeals to the adventurer in all of us, featuring lots of exploration, puzzle solving, and enemy combat. Over the last year, we have worked hard to create a game called Aquadeus. Aquadeus is a 3-quarter top-down adventure game, similar in some respects to the Legend of Zelda series. The world of Aquadeus is composed of 6 massive worlds, all connected vertically by a gargantuan pillar, flowing freely with water. Its main focus is to allow players to immerse themselves and get lost in the vast environments of the worlds, and really play into the deep story and thick lore of the game.
The story of Walrus revolves around the structure of the unique universe we've created. In this universe, there are 6 worlds, all connected vertically by a colossal pillar. Water is created at the highest world, Walrus, and flows down the pillar, carrying water to the other worlds. When the water mysteriously stops flowing one day, it's up to the player to travel to Walrus from the lowest of the 6 worlds, the desert land of Sikius, and unfold the mystery of the water's disappearance. A unique mechanic of the game is water. The player uses water for all their attacks. Due to the events of the story, it's hard to find, meaning the player is going to have to conserve their ammo in order to defeat various enemies. Upon finding water, the player can replenish their water level, effectively refilling ammo. This serves as to force the player to explore, and it adds the motivation to find ammo. The most compelling feature of Walrus is something that we believe has been neglected by a lot of games in the industry today: the element of exploration. We believe the game can capitalize on the audience's need to explore, and as we progress as a studio, we can continue to expand upon the world we've created.
The game Aquadeus contains a variety of functional interfaces corresponding to various segments of the game. The options menu contains the key binding setup, which has been written to mimic the form of the keys bound to specific actions. On the left side of the options interface, relative to key binding, we have our movement keys listed in a vertical row, RW, A, S, and D. That's corresponding to the left side of the keyboard, of course, since it's meant to be intuitive, while the right side of the keyboard contains pretty much everything not relating to movement. Lastly, there's a default button. Since we're only human and won't always remember what the keys were set at initially if we change them up, and seeing as Aquadeus is using a pretty standard default binding setup, it's likely that any changes might not be satisfactory to a player who would then want to reverse their decision. When the player first begins to play Aquadeus, the HUD seems rather basic, consisting of a health bar in the upper left corner, denoted as health by the red coloration of the bar and the heart contained within a circle from which that bar extends. As the player is wounded by enemies, this bar depletes, visually giving way to a darker color denoting the emptiness of the bar as opposed to the fullness implied by the red coloration. As the player gets a little farther, they ultimately discover a gauntlet which can be used to turn water into an attack. Of course, this also means that a bar representing the player's limited water supply must be displayed in addition to the health bar mentioned earlier. This was displayed as the blue bar in the upper right-hand corner of the screen, which is very similar in design to the health bar, aside from the depletion condition, coloration of the bar, and the fact that the heart has been replaced by a water droplet.
On the side of object-oriented systems analysis and design, we tried to simplify the actions the player needs to play the game. In the main menu, we give them basic options that are intuitive. The option to load a save game is also crucial, as our game would be much too large to play through in one sitting. This load game operation needs to ensure that a save game file actually exists, and if one does not, it needs to restrict the player from being able to select load game. We allow the user to remap their controls so they can play the game with controls that are familiar and comfortable to them. Whether the player selects new or load game, gameplay begins. A very simplified version of our gameplay involves player interaction through the keyboard, followed by a sprite animation and movement updates. If they enter a new room, that room and all its accompanying items and backgrounds must be loaded from a file and displayed properly. Of course, if this file is missing or corrupt, the room will not be displayed correctly, and the game will cease to function properly. The game uses SpriteLib, a library that uses OpenGL to display and animate sprites. The basic classes included are the game and sprite class. The game class controls all aspects of the gameplay and player interaction, while the sprite class controls specific sprite movement and actions as well as properly loading and animating the sprite image. To increase efficiency and make the design more object-oriented, we use the sprite class as a base class and derive many classes from it. These include the player, enemy, item, bullet, and tile classes. Each of these classes initializes their variables and perform movements and collisions in a way that suits each object. Collision checking is an extremely important part of the game code. Without it, there would be no way to give or receive damage or even pick up items. This class simply takes in a pointer to a sprite object and compares it to the current sprite object. If the boundaries of each object intersect, then a collision has occurred, and the operation returns true. From there, a collided method is called, which can do specific things depending on the nature of the objects that collided.
Although we believe the game was a huge success, it's no surprise that the game has its fair share of limitations. Some of the software limitations we encountered include the lack of a proper physics engine, which would have enhanced the player's attacks and movement. Another software limitation we encountered was our inability to use 3D models in our game. With the proper programs, we could have included more complex and impressive art elements. That being said, we believe the art style we used complements the style of gameplay present in Aquadeus. We also faced resource limitations when developing the game, including some brought on by our small number of group members and budget. If we had access to a bigger budget, we would drastically increase the size of our studio. In particular, we would make use of having a larger programming team and art department. Having these extra group members would ensure that the assets needed for the production stage would be completed on time, leaving more time for complex additions to the game. Oh, stuttered like the last word. Good enough.
Three-quarter top-down games have been a common sight in the game industry, having a mainstream popularity in the 90s, and has seen a re-emergence in the popularity with the onset of handheld devices and mobile games. The art style is very reminiscent of the extremely popular Legend of Zelda series. The art style is a mixture of cartoon and realistic elements.